Hello, and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest. October 26, 2023. The live from Madison edition. I'm David Plotz of CityCast, and we are live at the sold-out Majestic Theater in downtown Madison, Wisconsin, with a crowd of rowdy Madisonians. I would just like to note in preface that we had lunch like many hours ago at the Old Fashioned, and I had cheese curds and a fried walleye and onion strings. So if I have a stroke during the show, you'll know why.
But no one, sadly, because I'd already eaten, had the bratwurst. So
they mourned that. I had a really boring salad, but it was really good.
To my far left, a man who knows far more about Bob La Follette and William Proxmire than anyone else in the room, the host of CBS Primetime, John Dickerson. And to my near left, but only geographically, since by Madison standards, I think we're all like MAGA, probably, is a woman who cares as much about the Supreme Court of your state as you do, but who cannot pronounce Janet Protasewitz's name. Emily, try it.
It's really true. Protasewicz.
Emily Bazelon. This week on the Gabfest, Wisconsin is the red-hot center of America's fights over gerrymandering. What?
No, I was just thinking of Protasewicz and then all the different pronunciations we've had during the day.
Don't do another pronunciation. Don't even let me think about it.
It was great. At one point, it was Smith. It was really far off. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
Wisconsin is at the red-hot center of America's fights over gerrymandering, populism, and democracy. We will talk to Governor Tony Evers about whether the fate of the Republic hinges on what happens here in Madison. Then Mike Johnson, a man none of us, and I mean literally, let us be honest, none of us had heard of 3 days ago, has become the Speaker of the House of Representatives. What will come after this Republican orgy of cannibalism? Then Mark Meadows has immunity. Jenna Ellis has cut a deal. So did Ken Chesbrough. So did Sidney release the Kraken Powell. How big a threat is this week's cascade of guilty pleas to criminal defendant Donald Trump? Plus, of course, we'll have cocktail chatter, including a couple of surprise cocktail chatter guests. Ooh. Hey there, Gabfest listeners. Before we start the show, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little later. It's from one of our partners, SAP. Is your business reaching an exciting turning point? Are you ready to seize the moment for growth? When you're facing uncertainty, SAP can help you be ready for anything that happens next. To learn more, head to sap.com/be ready. And stick around to hear how Ember Technologies seized the moment. You have elected our guest twice as governor of Wisconsin. And I do mean that you did it, since Tony Evers won, especially in 2022, thanks to huge majorities here in Dane County. So please welcome Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers to the Gabfest.
I've got a microphone.
I think some of them voted for you.
Yes. Last time I was on this stage, I was raising money.
Oh.
We're raising money for ourselves.
Yeah, you may lose some money after tonight. You never know.
It's a good place to raise money. These are great people. These are Wisconsinites. I feel like, I have a microphone. I used to be a high school principal. Like I should be calling somebody down to the office.
You should definitely do that. There was somebody heckling earlier.
All right. I want your name.
So Governor Evers, you are famously interested in fixing roads and schools, really interested in schools, yet you're governor of a state of Wisconsin at a time that all anyone seems to want to talk about is gerrymandering and the future of democracy. Why has your state, which is famously civil, famously sort of this wonderful bastion of democracy and progressivism. Why has it become such a poisonously divided state?
Donald Trump? I mean, really. I mean, whatever's happening here in Wisconsin, I mean, just what happened today with, Michael Johnson? Michael Johnson now is two people away from being president of the United States. This person is, doesn't believe that Joe Biden was elected officially. He wants to mess with transgender kids' lives. All the things that, frankly, we're messing around with here. And so I think, I'd love to say that for all my other Democratic governors in the country that this is something that's just unique to Wisconsin. I think we handle things in a lot different ways, but other states. But it's a national issue. It started with a lame duck session, even before I took office, and they met and they passed several laws that made it more difficult for the executive branch to operate.
But why is that happening? Why is it happening now and it didn't happen a century ago?
Robin Voss wasn't born a century ago. He's a pretty young guy. Well, you're right. Although I think things happened, 100 years ago too. But the bottom line is this is a national effort to mess with democracy, and it's sad that is kind of the guts of what's going on. But I believe it's true. It started with, as I said, with them taking over some authority and just continuing on to this day. And, I have a great veto pen, so I veto a lot of things. We do. But even that has been diminished. And so we need to get rid of the gerrymandered maps. But at the end of the day, it's the people of Wisconsin that are going to count, and we can turn this around and be a civil state where we do agree on some things, disagree on some things. But right now, it's few and far between, especially on the big issues.
So there is a new lawsuit called Clark that is challenging the maps, the state legislative maps, not the congressional maps. And it would address the gerrymandering, which is making it, so hard for Democrats when they win a majority of votes to actually be a majority in the state legislature. Right. Obviously your state Supreme Court before the election of Justice Protasiewicz ruled against a similar challenge, and now there's a new case and she's on the court. And we're seeing this in a number of states where justices say one thing and then there's a different majority, and then they say something else. Mm-hmm. Is that a problem in itself, or is it more important to really consider these issues from a variety of perspectives? What do you make of that shift? Is that something that people are going to find unsettling?
Oh, I think we will be in a much better place by the first of next year. I do believe that we will have the maps starting to be redrawn, so that we're in a good place in a few months. After that, so she won by a lot. I thought I had a landslide at 3.5%, but she won by a lot. And it's not that we expect her to deliver the goods, but we have a good case. We have a good case. And we actually won last time in the Supreme Court, Wisconsin Supreme Court, with people's maps that we drew. And it was about a 50-50 split, and all that was good. And then it went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they knocked it down, sent it back to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and they said, thank God, we don't have to do that, and went back to the present maps. That's what it's all about. It's about representation. You look at any polling that's done in Wisconsin on abortion, about any other issue, and the people of Wisconsin are with us. They're not against us. And where the Republicans have taken this, that's not supported by the people. I mean, I have two or three people on my cabinet that have been approved by the Senate. The rest are in limbo and can be fired at any time. That's a problem. Thank God they're willing to put up with it, but how do you get good people to work for state government in an appointed position if they can be fired at any minute by a Senate that basically just doesn't want me and the Democrats to succeed and to really do what the people want? It's not about Democrats succeeding. It's doing what the people of Wisconsin want.
Governor, I want to try and go back a little bit to David's question. You mentioned Donald Trump, the Speaker of the Assembly, you also mentioned, but there are a lot of voters supporting those people. You say that those aren't Wisconsinites who are supporting them, but some number of them are. I just wonder if you could, one of the things that Wisconsin has to wrestle with and that the country has to wrestle with is who are the voters? What is the electorate feeling, and whether even those who may be misguided in who they choose to represent them, nevertheless have core feelings that are real? And how do you read that in your state? What's behind the support for these politicians? And to the extent that we've seen more violence, you've experienced threats yourself, how have you seen that trajectory change over the course of your career?
Well, first of all, I think, it's gotten much. I run into some of these people myself. Yeah. They're occasionally outside our house with AK-40 or AR-45s or whatever the hell they are. Those big guns. Yeah. And because we have open carry in Wisconsin. But I think it really is a minority of people that are just been disaffected by any number of things that we haven't been able to address. But the things that we did during the pandemic to bolster small businesses, to get roads fixed, do things like that, that's a 85% or more group of people in Wisconsin want that stuff done. They want the government to work. And the number of people that are really aggressively against us, mainly because of who we are or who we represent, I think it's a small number, but it's loud, and Donald Trump has given them voice.
So, Governor, you worked as a teacher. You mentioned you worked as a principal. I think one of the things that I find so unsettling as a parent and someone who went to school myself is the way education has become so divisive, and the way that teachers are kind of at the front line of that division. And I wonder what you think, as a former educator who now has to govern, you can do in the state to restore enthusiasm and respect for teachers.
Yeah, that's a great question. Unfortunately, that began a long time ago with Act 10 when they took bargaining rights away from public school teachers. And we've continued since then. And right now it is around some culture wars that are really kind of bizarre. I think we have to continue advocating for the right things for kids, and we will win this thing. I know two smaller districts, and this isn't the end of more than those two, but that were taken over by people on ban books and the issues around transgender and so on and so forth. And they took over those school districts, and they're already been voted off, 2 years later. And what's happened is in those small towns, people have risen up and said, "This is bullshit. We want to have good schools. We don't want to spend all our time banning books and figuring out what we're going to do with transgender kids." And they've already lost. The one that was the top vote getter the first time and brought that to a school district, came in last place. It's done. So we can fight this in all sorts of different ways, but at the end of the day, it's going to be about people in those local school boards making the right decisions, and that will happen. I'm convinced of that. I went, when I was my first superintendent's job in a small town, and I had a school board that had 3 Tea Party people on it. and very conservative financially. But about halfway through the first year, they said, oh my God, we got to run a school district here. We got to do the right things for kids. And they turned out to be 3 of the best school board members I ever worked with. So it's just, I hate to say it's just a matter of time, but it is important to give it some time, advocate for the right things. People will figure it out.
Emily normally goes, but I have a question about education, because now more than ever do we need education to improve, because we've seen the test scores drop. They were already in trouble, but then the pandemic has made them even worse. How concerned are you that there may be a lost generation from during the pandemic, and what can be done to fill that gap, let alone fix the previous problems?
Yeah, well, the data sure suggests that those 2 years are really difficult on kids. There's no question about that. And what we have to do, frankly, is provide resources for our schools. We can't be starving our schools at the same time. We're making sure that kids are learning what they need to learn today. So I think it's more about resources. It always has been about resources. But it's also, in addition to money for schools, when children come to school, they're only in school 5 hours a day. We have to worry about health care, we have to worry about transportation, we have to worry about affordable housing, all those things that surround these kids on a regular basis, many children living in poverty or in difficult situations. And we just can't say, it's a teacher's problem to figure all this out. It's not. It's the state's problem. We need to make sure that, yes, we provide money for schools, but we also have to provide the resources to address all those other issues.
So after your last election, you said it turns out that being boring wins. So what did you mean by that, and how do you cultivate it?
How do I what? What was that?
What did you mean, and how do you cultivate that?
How do I cultivate that? Well, it's my DNA to be boring. So my children, maybe my grandchildren, have that DNA gene someplace in them. But at the end of the day, I am who I am, and I'm going to keep fighting for the right thing. I don't give a crap if I'm boring or not. When the Republicans raise the ante and say stupid things, certainly we'll address that. But I'm not going to, what they want me to do is take it to a different level, and then we go to a different level, and then we go to a different level, and nothing gets done. And so I'm going to continue to be who I am, and boring wins sometimes, and we're going to hope that it continues to win.
So, Governor, last question for you. None of us is from Wisconsin, although
we've already claimed our Wisconsin.
We claimed Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Most of the
Superior.
Yeah.
Superior.
Wauwatosa. Yeah. See?
Those are good places.
None of me is from Wisconsin.
All right.
Yes. Most of the people who are going to listen to the Gabfest are not in Wisconsin. So tell our listeners something that people get wrong about your state.
Get wrong about our state? It's what? It's not flat. That's right. Yes, well, I will wax eloquently about the state topography and its beauty. We are surrounded by water. Lake Michigan, one of the cleanest lakes now in Great Lakes, Lake Superior, which is the cleanest lake. Mississippi River. In western Wisconsin, the people that live there say they actually have a newspaper called the West Coast Gazette. This is the west coast of Wisconsin. I was in right outside of Viroqua, Wisconsin today, a small town, Viroqua, and with some help from the state, and this is typical Wisconsin. The local co-op and a nonprofit that serves people that are struggling financially work together for our solar array for that part of the state. And obviously the state kicked in some money. I get that. But the most important thing is they're going to allow people with a lower income will be able to get rebate money from those solar, so that they're going to save like 50% on their bills, their electric bills. That happens in Wisconsin, folks.
Yeah.
That happens in Wisconsin.
So what I've learned is that Wisconsin has water and the sun.
And rebates.
Governor Evers, thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and SAP. How do you know when to seize the moment for growth? When your opportunity arrives, you need to be ready. From expanding into new markets to hiring, business leaders face so many tough decisions.
My name is Brooke Clark. I'm the VP of Business Transformation and Strategy at Ember Technologies, a temperature control brand.
In 2016, Ember launched its core product, the Ember Mug.
The feeling of drinking out of an Ember mug is like nothing else. The coffee or tea will maintain that exact temperature for the entire length of your drinking experience.
Since then, the company learned how to pivot and grow in unexpected ways. And with SAP tools, they knew they were ready.
A few years ago, Ember had an opportunity to launch our products with a global electronics retailer. The tricky part of it was that we would be expanding to 27 countries around the world. It was a massive undertaking, not just due to hitting launch dates and timelines, but also given the intricacies of meeting product compliance in all those new countries. We only had a few months to get prepared for this rapid growth. We had to very quickly make changes on a fundamental level with our systems, our e-commerce, all of the integrations, the cloud-based systems that we put in place in order to facilitate the expansion into 27 countries has continued to benefit us to this day. In order to be ready, you have to have the right processes in place so that when the moment presents itself, you can seize that moment.
Ember Technologies seized the moment for growth. Will you? Head to sap.com/be-ready to learn more.
This episode is sponsored by Trust and Will. Our lives are built with moments of joy and pride and success. And however you define those moments, securing your future should be part of the journey. But traditional estate planning can cost thousands of dollars. With Trust and Will, you can protect your legacy from the comfort of your home starting at just $159. From maintaining control of your assets to easing the burden on your loved ones, an estate plan can ensure your family stays prepared and protected. And Trust and Will has simplified the process of creating and managing your will or trust online, from finding out what's right for your family to finalizing documents with a notary. Each will or trust is crafted to be state-specific and customized to your specific needs, including care wishes, nominating guardians, final arrangements, and power of attorney. That's why Trust and Will has earned an overall rating of excellent with thousands of 5-star reviews on Trustpilot. So gain peace of mind today with Trust and Will. Get 10% off plus free shipping of your estate plan documents by visiting trustandwill.com/Gabfest. That's 10% off and free shipping at trustandwill.com/Gabfest. I want to give a huge thank you to our Slate Plus listeners. Because of listeners like you, we've been able to keep doing the Gabfest for so long. You get lots of great stuff for your subscription, bonus segments on every episode of the Gabfest, special discounts on live shows like this one, cocktail parties. You can come to the cocktail party and hang out with us like we just did. That was great. No hitting the paywall on the Slate site and much more. And this week, our Slate Plus bonus segment is going to be a Q&A with our audience here at the Majestic Theater. So if you are a member, thank you and enjoy it. If you are not a member, please go to slate.com/Gabfest Plus to become a member today. That's slate.com/Gabfest Plus. Okay, we're going to do a game. I didn't tell you guys about this. Emily, you can participate.
Yikes.
I don't think, John, you can participate. And audience, you're going to participate.
Wait, no, John.
I think John knows too much to participate in this game.
Unless it's a game about my first name, it's probably one I don't know too much about.
All right, we'll see. Okay, so I'm going to say a name, okay? And you're going to tell me by cheering whether you think this person was a serious candidate for House Speaker in the past 2 days, okay? Okay. So the louder you cheer, the more serious you are the more you believe this person was a serious candidate. Mark Green.
I have no idea.
Michael Kohler. Charles Fleischmann.
Was that just like you were bored of not making noise?
Yeah. I thought Kohler would get a shout out because there's a Kohler, Wisconsin. But yeah.
Okay.
There you
so
go.
there's some shout outs from Mike Kohler. All right. Scott Austin.
Yeah.
Woo!
Roger Williams.
But he did great things for Rhode Island.
Dexter Manley. Gary Palmer. Emily, which of those do you think was a candidate for House Speaker?
I have no idea. None. Gary Palmer.
So Mark Green apparently was a candidate. Michael Kohler's one of my college roommates. Charles Fleischmann was a candidate. Never heard of that guy. Scott Austin was not a candidate, but Austin Scott was. That was a trick.
That's tricky.
Roger Williams from Texas was. Dexter Manley, of course, was a great Washington football player. Gary Palmer, I guess, was a candidate. He got a bunch of votes for House. Anyway. The Donner Party, that is the House Republican caucus, finally has crossed the mountain pass. They found a cabin to hole up in. They agreed late Wednesday night on a new candidate for House Speaker, and late Tuesday night, and the House voted on Wednesday, including votes from zombie Tom Emmer and the reanimated corpse of Jim Jordan, voted to approve Mike Johnson as Speaker, bringing a temporary end to one of the sorriest spectacles in recent American political history. It came after the public humiliation of the top three Republicans, McCarthy, Scalise, Emmer, and also of Jim Jordan. Johnson, John, may be Speaker. He will get a portrait up of him in the House one day. I think we have a picture. Do we have a picture up there of his new office?
Oh, do we?
But it's...
No. Oh.
Oh, well, good. Thanks for telling
Wait,
us.
is it?
Now it's there.
So,
but it's a gruesome job he's walking into.
It is a gruesome job. Just first to the picture. Today was the day, after 22 days, that they finally took down Kevin McCarthy's plaque, which read like that. So there was a lot. You probably saw that on social media. So...
Wait, you have to explain how this happened to us. I've been waiting all day. I don't understand this.
Well, I'm just explaining what they're seeing on the thing.
Okay.
I'm in television. We're very dedicated to the pictures. Anyway, and so then now they've already got that up. So it's the sign above the door that goes into his suite of offices. Well, how did this happen? Well, as David pointed out, this is not a model for decision-making, the way this was run. But I think what comes to mind is what Lorne Michaels said about Saturday Night Live, which is, we don't go on because we're ready. We go on because it's 11:30. They needed a speaker. And, anybody who's been involved in long negotiations and gets irritated and it just finally is just like, screw it, let's just do it. That's essentially part of it. That's a little bit. Fatigue. Also, Johnson is unknown enough so that, and he stayed that way after he was voted for by the Republican conference. They asked him questions at we're going to return to this press conference, but it was so telling. You had, on the one hand, he was asked about the fact that he spearheaded the effort to block the 2020 election results. And Steve Scalise, the majority leader who was behind him, said, let's move on. We're going to talk about policy, sort of whispered it to Johnson. And they also booed the reporter who asked that. We're going to come back to this moment later. So he said, let's move on. Let's talk about policy. Then he was asked a question about funding Israel. And he said, we're not going to talk about policy here. So, so the idea was, keep it vague, right? And they just wanted to be done with it. That's why they got every single Republican to vote for it, which hasn't happened since Boehner was elected. And that's essentially it. He was able to be all things to all people. And then we'll talk about David's question, because I don't want to monologue forever, about all of the complexities and awful things that are ahead of him.
Talk about that.
Yeah, please,
let's talk about
that. We're listening.
Well, I mean, first of all, being leader is a really hard job because you have to listen to everybody and maintain your coalition.
John, can I pause?
Yeah.
This is like I'm just a bill up on Capitol Hill. What literally is the job of the speaker? What is his authority?
The Constitution just says, hey, you can pick a speaker, and then it moves on. But the official government document that talks about the speaker, you can pick the chairs of the committee, you pick what goes to the floor, you pick who can speak. So you have total control over what the House of Representatives essentially does. Now, there's a
legislative chamber, and then that translates into power outside the chamber, obviously.
Yes, but think about, does it translate to power outside the behavior? I mean, how much power in the end did Kevin McCarthy have? And in this party, what does it mean to have power? Now, so the problem in this job is being a coalition manager. You can't do it's like skiing a double black diamond. You can't just do it like that. And he is now a coalition manager with a teeny tiny little margin about to go into a fight about how to fund the government. And he now is not just speaking for his coalition, he's speaking for the Republican Party. And this is also, we can talk about his issue positions and the positions all Republicans have just refreshed for themselves by saying this is the kind of person we would like to lead us. So I've always said that the January 6th is not a question about the past, it's a question about the future. And they re-upped for his position on January 6th. So this is a fresh live thing. Are they going to certify the election results in 2024? So he's got to manage his coalition. Then he's got to go out and raise money. There's a big race, there's a big campaign ahead, and the Democrats might retake the House. He's got to speak on all these complicated issues where it's not so great for the 14 Republicans who are in districts where the constituents in that district voted for Joe Biden for president. They're in, Republicans are not necessarily going to have great races in those states. So is it good for Johnson to be talking about a national abortion ban? Is it good for him to be talking about, anything for those candidates? Because he was elected he's being called the MAGA speaker. And I think the reason that he's called that is Matt Gaetz, who, it's extraordinary that we're talking about Matt Gaetz, except for the fact that he shut down the House. He said, if you don't think that moving from Kevin McCarthy to MAGA Mike Johnson shows the ascendance of this movement and where the power in the Republican Party truly lies, then you're not paying attention. He's totally right.
Is there any way that the government does not shut down, David Plotz?
No, the government will shut down. John, but let's ask John.
The reason the government will shut down is he has very thin margins. They don't have an agreement. And the problem is they aren't wrestling with the fact that they don't control the Senate. I mean, there's an unreality here that is compounded, and I won't go on at length, but legislatures create messy outcomes when you don't have all the power over everything. And the entire speaker fight was about not accepting that reality.
Let's talk for 1 second about Tom Emmer, who's a person you had never heard of, honestly. And
I had never heard of.
And, briefly he had his 3.5 hours where he was going to be the Speaker of the House. And then he was defenestrated for not having supported Trump fulsomely enough, for having voted to certify the election, the terrible thing of voting to codify marriage equality. But one of the reasons he was taken out is that Trump sniped him. And it feels like Trump has the heckler's veto for anything they want to do. He can't make things, but he can break things. Right.
And also, I think you have to see it in two ways. He has the heckler's veto, so he can claim Tom Emmer's as a victory for knocking Tom Emmer's out. And this is what's so extraordinary about that press conference after Johnson was picked as the consensus candidate for the Republicans. Donald Trump had just knocked Emmer's out for what sin? Voting to certify the election, believing in the democratic process. Why did Johnson win? In part because he was the chief architect of the effort to block the democratic process, which they then wouldn't talk about when asked about it at the press conference. And what I think is notable about that press conference is the kind of sleight of hand. On the one hand, we're going to knock Emmer, who, by the way, is a leader, knows how to count votes, knows how to do all this stuff about coalition building that is the result. That is a precondition for actually making legislation to address needs, which you're supposed to do in a body that is there to legislate. He knows how to do all that stuff. Nope, can't do it because he believed in Joe Biden's victory. And then minutes later, they're saying, well, let's put that under the rug. That kind of sleight of hand is dangerous because it tries to forget the second attack on the Capitol in the entire United States history. And you shouldn't ever be able to forget that.
So David's running thesis for years, months, weeks has been that dysfunction in the government can take place, even if it seems pretty clearly at the hands of the Republicans, without actually hurting the Republicans. Are we going to see that this time? Or is the extent of the, chaos and the fact that now they've elected someone who has this record that you've been describing, who seems to be sort of plucked out of the ether, and the likely chaos that's going to continue, or at least no government open, no bills passed, et cetera, is that going to actually have political repercussions for Republicans in 24?
This is the second answer to David's question, which I didn't give, so I'm glad you asked that. What if Donald Trump really wants chaos? What if there are lots of people who want chaos? Because you create chaos and then you sell order. So you like it when the House looks dysfunctional, and Republicans who created this dysfunction like it when the House looks dysfunctional because they can say, look how dysfunctional it is. Let me do more things to stop the dysfunction. And when you have that sleight of hand I was talking about, you essentially let me do more things and don't you worry about what I'm going to do. And that's really, really frightening. And I think the most important thing is that the reason compromise is important, the reason knowing how these institutions are supposed to work and dealing with the messiness of those institutions is that's the only way you address all of those problems that rile up all of those voters who are so angry with the system. And the worst thing for any of us is that people look at the madness and say, oh, it's just madness, screw them, because then you give no worth to the institution and you create the conditions for people who want to find solutions through their own methods, which are violent.
Given that, Emily, if you're a Democrat and you're seeking to maximize the political advantage of Democrats in 2024, what do you do now? I mean, do you allow the government to? I mean, where do you seek? Do you seek compromise at all? Do you not seek compromise? Do you allow it to sink into this dysfunction, or not?
I mean, I think one thing that has worked for Democrats or worked in 2022 is portraying Republicans as extreme, right? And this is going to be pretty clearly extreme. I also seems like the only things the House really needs to do in the next year is find a way to make the government open and provide funding for Ukraine and Israel. From the Democrats' point of view, I'm sure the Republicans have an actual agenda, but then the question becomes, what would the Democrats be able to trade for those things? Is there actually anything that they would be willing to give that the Republicans want to take?
I don't know. I mean, I guess what I'm stuck on is the fact that, we are talking about clearing the lowest possible bar. There's so many people who are so frustrated with what they think is happening in America. We're going to have David Leonard on next week to talk about his new book, which is about, and he has this amazing statistic in it, which says that, around the World War II era, 92% of parents could expect their children to earn more than they did. And now that number's down to 50%. All of the routes to prosperity in America and to the American dream have been clotted up for one reason. Some of those roads don't even exist anymore. That is the reason we join together in governments and adjudicate our differences peacefully to address the problems before us so that we can create better lives for people who don't have the advantages that we have. And people would flock across the world to come here for that promise. That promise is silent when all you're doing is doing the bare minimum. And that's what we're talking about, is an institution and a set of incentives to do the bare minimum. And those who won in this fight by naming Johnson have a set of ideas that they hope to basically clamp on top of the legislative process. It doesn't work that way.
Okay, John, just to close us out, generally I think everyone agrees that people who serve in the U.S. military should be paid. They agree that they want Social Security checks to go out, which I guess will keep going out. They would like, if they come to Washington, they would like a museum to be open. I don't think they want the air traffic controllers to be not angry and also to be getting paid. So how do we get from this spot to some kind of compromise that gets us to the next election, at least.
Well, I think it'll probably be the pain we'll get to. Remember, there was one of the shutdowns. The pain ended up being the national airport was closed, and all the airports were closed, or not closed, but they were on these really reduced schedules because of the air traffic controllers. And all the constituents were like, I want to go home to visit grandma, and you guys better reopen this. And everybody found religion. I think that's what's going to end up happening. And I think also he has a teeny tiny margin. There are going to be a bunch of moderates that are going to go to the new speaker and say, hey, you're killing us. This may not be hurting people in districts where they win by 45% because it's full of Republican voters, but my district is not built that way. But the pain is probably going to have to get to that level based on what Johnson has said, what the people who he's responsible for his victory have claimed for him to believe, and the fact that they don't control the Senate. I mean, it's like the math seems inevitable.
Maybe the executive branch, this is a mean thing to say to anyone who has to travel, so forgive me. Maybe the executive branch should mess with the airports first, like do the things first that are really going to make people inconvenienced to the point of that kind of pain.
Wait, what? Wait.
So
what?
that way you create energy quickly to have the shutdown end, as opposed, because I feel like it took a while last time for them to get to that, right? They pull the plug on different parts of the government at different.
Yeah, I don't think the executive.
There's Thanksgiving travel. The government's going to shut down November 17th. There's Thanksgiving travel. Can you imagine? And then there's Christmas travel.
Yeah, that's going to be awful for people.
I want to leave us with one thought, which might be a segue to our next topic. But as a part of her legal statement, Jenna Ellis, who's the lawyer for President Trump, as a part of her legal statement, she said that if she knew then what she knows now about how the election was not stolen, she would not have done what she did. If Johnson were asked that same question, knowing what he knows now, would he have spearheaded the effort to block the vote? If he had given an answer that was anything different than, yes, I would have done the exact same thing, if he'd given any other different answer, he would not be speaker. And that is extraordinary. The idea that you can basically make up the rules in order to make sure your guy is still president is alive and well. And
the person who has the power to certify the election results the next election has that view and is being rewarded for it.
This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by SimpliSafe. It's still October, but the holidays are coming up fast. Before your life goes into overdrive with the holidays, protect your home with SimpliSafe Home Security. So if you've been thinking about protecting your home, start with SimpliSafe. You can get a brand new system today for 40% off. Experts love SimpliSafe. It was named the best home security system of 2023 by U.S. News and World Report. SimpliSafe is comprehensive protection for your whole home with advanced sensors that detect break-ins, fires, floods, and more, plus HD cameras for both inside and out. And it's powered by 24/7 professional monitoring for less than $1 a day, half the cost of traditional home security. And satisfaction is backed by SimpliSafe's money-back guarantee. Try SimpliSafe for 60 days risk-free. If you don't love it, return your system for a full refund. For a limited time, save 40% on any new system with a Fast Protect plan. Visit simplysafe.com/Gabfest. That's simplysafe.com/Gabfest. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. Hey, Gabfest listeners, I have a special message for those of you in Canada. It's about a show that I think you should listen to, Canada Land. Every week, Canada Land's journalists bring you news and conversations that honestly can be hard to find these days. With rigorous reporting and thoughtful analysis, their episodes can bring you into the most important conversations from across the country. From a radical form of reconciliation emerging in Saskatchewan to in-depth debates around gun rights and the rise of fascism, Canada Land stories will surprise you and make you think. Try Canada Land today to find out why Canadian news doesn't have to sound like Canadian news. Search Canada Land in your podcast app.
Maybe you've heard that there's a civil war coming.
Tyrants disarm the people they intend to oppress.
That with more than 100 gun deaths a day in America, the powers that be are going to have to do something.
They don't like the Second Amendment. They want to get rid of the Second Amendment.
You've heard that the government has always hated an armed populace.
All they want to do is take guns away from law-abiding citizens.
But in my 8 years of gun reporting, The game is rigged. My name is Alon Stevens, and I'm an investigative reporter. What if I told you that when it comes to the U.S. government, we're the biggest gun dealers on the block? That the halls of American power know exactly what I know. That guns aren't just who we are. They're what we do best.
Guns are flying off the shelves. Ghost gun mill in Dorchester.
Drop the gun! Drop the gun!
This is The Gun Machine, how America is forged by the gun industry. A new podcast from WBUR and The Trace. Search and follow The Gun Machine in your podcast app.
If you think the House Speaker's race was hard to track, try paying attention to Donald Trump's legal troubles. The president is facing 91 criminal charges in 4 separate cases in 4 jurisdictions, at least 2 civil trials, and he has a ton more to worry about this week. The past few days have seen a series of tumbling dominoes, namely Sidney Powell, Jenna Ellis, Ken Chesbrough, and Mark Meadows. The first 3, Trump lawyers, intimately involved in various election stealing schemes, have taken plea deals and agreed to testify against other defendants, at least in Georgia. Meadows, the White House chief of staff in the final days, appears to have sought some kind of immunity in exchange for dishing on Trump's efforts to overturn the election. Also, in other Trump news, he was fined $10,000 on Wednesday for violating a gag order in one of his cases, although not the gag order that was put on him last week, a totally different gag order.
And I didn't know he had 2 gag orders. I was wondering if the New York judge was somehow like, once there's a gag order, any judge can fire up a gag order. Are there really 2
gag orders separately.
It's so hard to keep up with all the gags.
There's a lot of...
So, Emily, what happened with these lawyers? Why are they all singing now? Why did they all give it up now? And what does it signify that they have agreed to testify?
Well, I mean, look, the threat of going to prison can sometimes make people have a, big moment of awakening. They also have mounting legal bills, and they also feared threats to their law licenses going forward. And the kinds of crimes they pled to were either misdemeanors or had included in the plea agreement that it was not a crime of moral turpitude, which is the standard that a state bar sometimes uses for disbarring or disciplining people. So yeah, they had a lot of good reasons. I mean, this is a huge development in this case, and it really, I think, validates the approach of this giant RICO case that District Attorney Fani Willis brought in Georgia, because this is, when you're the prosecutor, this is what you want. You want the smaller fish to get scared and then start singing about what the bigger fish were up to. The way you get a plea deal like this is to promise to cooperate and to testify. And so that's what she has now, is cooperating witnesses. And that should be very nerve-wracking for the people higher up the food chain, starting with Donald Trump.
Can you get into the legal nitty-gritty there about why these lawyers testifying about Trump might be harmful to him?
Yeah, I mean, Sidney Powell was right in the middle of all the craziest stuff. I mean, she is the person who sort of stands for crazy MAGA lawyering.
Yeah, including the idea that Hugo Chavez was involved in... Just
Dominion
so everybody
machines.
thinks that's crazy, the new Speaker of the House also promoted that same theory.
Super. She was at meetings at the White House where they were talking about naming her as a special prosecutor so she could go investigate the conspiracies about trying to, commandeer voting equipment around the country that the federal government was going to do. That was either her idea or she was the one bandying it about. So she knows things, and she was a part of these situations. And the question is going to be, what kind of documentation does she have about that?
But
That's just one example.
But it isn't, I guess the thing that I keep reading about is that a lot of these charges against Trump are predicated on the idea that there's criminal intent, that he is the orchestrator of it. And it's that he's, whereas he's going to say, oh, I was just taking my lawyer's advice, or he might say that.
Right.
And doesn't this put that defense in danger?
Yes, I think it absolutely does, because once you have your lawyers saying, actually, this wasn't true, And I knew that at the time. That pollutes their legal advice. And I think, just the idea that when the other part of this case is going to be all the other information Trump was getting, which was good information. And so this idea that he relied on them exclusively and that that's going to be his defense. And I think they will we'll see. The biggest question will be, what did they have to show that that's not true? That his claims about them, about the roles they were playing, was he really directing them, rather than the other way around? And I think it's worth also remembering Rudy Giuliani's role in all of this, because he's a key part of the picture with Ellis, with Powell, at least, for sure.
He was a member of the elite strike force team.
Exactly. We don't want to forget that.
They never got to wear those night vision goggles, though. Jen Ellis said, I was basically led astray, I was led astray by lawyers who should know better, which was basically a direct shot at him. So presumably he would be among the most nervous.
Yes, he seems to be really exposed here. And then Chesbro is the person who, pled guilty involving the fake elector scheme. And that is obviously a different part of the RICO allegations, but one that's also important. And again, it's going to be this question, how high up does this go? Who else can he implicate? And then if you can implicate Giuliani or Eastman, these people who seem to be closer to Trump, then those people start to have an incentive to plead guilty and then to cooperate. And so that's what you want, is kind of dominoes.
And Chesbro testified to the idea, or not testified, he has emails that he wrote, which he's now said, yes, I did that, which was the idea that this fake elector scheme and basically all the legal maneuvering was not to adjudicate a point they thought was valid, but basically to slow things down.
Right. And that's illegal.
What do you guys make? What do you guys make of the leak came out of ABC News that Mark Meadows, who was the White House chief of staff during the last days of the Trump presidency, has sought immunity and has been talking to Jack Smith, the federal prosecutor who's doing the federal cases against Trump?
I think we're not quite sure what he actually has said, how much of that's true. His lawyer is disputing that. But it sounds like what he has is what's called use immunity, which is pretty limited from his point of view. It means that the prosecutors, if they want to indict him, cannot use his own words against him. But that's different from cannot indict him at all. And it's also different from being a cooperating witness. It means that in this limited way you're talking, but it probably means he's not really spilling everything he has to the government. He's not under that kind of pressure. He is, though, another of the indicted RICO defendants. And so in that case, he really has exposure, even though Jack Smith, the federal prosecutor, has not indicted him yet.
And the key claim in the ABC reporting is that Meadows told Trump repeatedly that you lost the election.
And that Trump was being dishonest when he said otherwise.
Which goes back to your point, David, about Trump's state of mind and what he knew when he was behaving in all of this.
Filthy mens rea.
And obviously Meadows was very close to Trump, spending a lot of time with Trump. Again, what kinds of notes, emails, documentation does he have?
John, David French, the New York Times columnist, wrote today that he said that the guilty pleas have a potential legal effect, but they could also have a cultural and political effect as well. When the MAGA lawyers admit to their misdeeds, it should send a message to the Republican rank and file that the entire effort to steal the election was built on a mountain of lies. Does that actually seem like it is happening? Does it seem like anything that has happened in these, this rabbit warren of cases against Trump has moved Republican voters in any meaningful way, or independent voters?
No. Well, independent voters are where they are, pretty much where they are. I don't think the movement, there is no movement. I think this is again why this sleight of hand in the press conference after Johnson was named is so important, because it's creating a set of tools to wave away all of this. And what's happened now is that and it's created a set of tools to wave away unpleasant things at the direction of the likely Republican nominee. So to the extent that what happens usually is a nominee says something, but then his whole party, people are like, wait, that's a crazy thing to say. I have no ability in politics to keep up with a statement that's like that. But they have become trained during the Trump presidency to kind of sign on to whatever he says the story is. So the story from the former president now is basically Meadows and all these other people are only flipping because they're worried about the legal bills and they're, going to jail and all that, so that they're not really truthfully saying he did anything wrong. They're just saying what they have to say to get a plea deal and be done. And so that will work through the bloodstream. There won't be anybody like Mitt Romney might stand up and say that doesn't make any sense. He'll be the only one. And so the voters so far, based on everything that's happening in the Republican primary, don't seem to be moving in the least, if not except to Trump's side.
And this will also be, if there is ever a trial, the defense at trial. Why believe these people? They all pled guilty, and they have every incentive to implicate other people, right? That's always how.
How is the prosecution going to deal with the fact that it's like liars who have a history of lying, working for a liar, lying about everything? I mean, it does seem problematic that it's liars all the way down.
I mean, that's why it matters so much that it not just be their word, that they actually have backup for the things they're saying. And Michael Cohen is an obvious example here, where you have someone who pled guilty, who went to prison, but, is he completely disbelieved by jurors, by the public? Not necessarily. And again, how can you back up these points you're making?
Can I make basically the point I make all the time, but it's worth, we're talking as
why stop now?
Yes, exactly.
Why make this the night you don't do it?
Right. Well, we're talking about the legal context, which is, of course, quite important, and it's important what the president's state of mind is for the legal context. But we should also not forget that he's asking to be rewarded with a second term for this behavior, and that standard is quite different. That standard should be that before you go ripping the country apart by claiming an election was stolen, a president has some obligation to be steward of the madness he's about to unleash into the world, which is claiming that the democratic process has stolen an election. That's the obligation of the job. He should have performed it when he was in it. And yet there's not a single piece of evidence of the president saying, I might think this election is stolen, but gee, before we go out and say that, we should probably care about what that's going to do to the country. There is no microscope strong enough to find a piece of evidence of him doing that. And that's a failure of his time in office. But it is really not the kind of behavior for which he should be rewarded with a second term. And that's... And this is not like his position on, Treaty of the Sea. This is on the central thing, which is whether power can be peacefully transferred in this country, because that's the precondition for answering all of those incredibly difficult questions that aren't going answered by a dysfunctional system. It's like the core of the core. So that's all still out there.
And wouldn't he be more popular in some way if he could actually figure out a way to pivot, right? I mean, that could make him more appealing to independents. It could soften him in some way. And yet, zero chance this is going to happen, because this is all about self-vindication.
Let's go to cocktail chatter. Last time I was in Wisconsin, I was in Milwaukee, and I was served a Bloody Mary, which had celery, a pickle, bacon, cheese, a soft pretzel, a caramel donut in it.
Brats?
It was quite a cocktail. There was a brat in it.
It was a brat.
I sucked it through a hot dog.
Yes, chased by a cup of hot fat.
That would have been a relief at that point. John, what is your chatter?
I beg your indulgence. I feel like I've talked a lot, and I'm afraid that's going to continue.
Keep going. You're doing great.
Okay, so my chatter is about when we had some construction going on next to the apartment next to us, and it kind of has been going on for a really long time, and it doesn't seem...
Maybe you shouldn't keep talking. Sorry.
Are you acting as my counsel? Anyway, this construction that was going on next to us, it seemed kind of dodgy. And so I started to think about, and there was no permit, or, in New York, there are places where there's any little bit of construction, there's just plastered with permits, no permits there. And so I started to think about where the permitting system came from and and where and why it came from, because I'm really dull. Anyway, turns out the story is kind of interesting. So there was a time in America where, okay, you need a permit now to do anything. You have to have engineers to do it. But there was a time in America where you could build a huge, hulking, dangerous structure in the middle of downtown, like creaking over, couples as they're pushing their baby in the pram and people as they're outside taking their ham sandwiches out of the wax paper. And that creaking, big, huge sculpture, you could just make it. And that was fine. And everybody had to go around hoping that it didn't, collapse on them. Well, on January 15th, 1919, it was a very busy time on the front pages of America. You had the meetings in Paris to determine the end of the First World War. America had just come out of the Spanish flu epidemic. And nevertheless, on the 15th of January, as a number of municipal workers were sitting down to have lunch of ham sandwiches in the shadow of the molasses tank at the Purity Distilling Company in Boston's North End, they heard a rumbling, and then they heard what sounded like gunfire. And that was the rivets of a 50-foot high, 90-foot in diameter container of molasses that unzipped and outrushed 2.3 million gallons of molasses all at once. Historian Stephen Poulsen has written a book called Dark Tide, The Great Molasses Flood of 1919, and it recounts this extraordinary story. And here's how the Boston Post reported it in the language of the time. A rumble, a hiss, some say a boom and a swish, and the wave of molasses swept out. It smote the huge steel girders of the L structure and bent, twisted, and snapped them as if by the smash of a giant's fist. Across the street, down the street, it rolled like a two-sided breaker at the seashore, 30 feet high. It smashed tenements. Swirling black, it sucked a modest frame dwelling from where it nestled beside the 3-story brick tenements, and threw it, a mass of wreckage, under the L structure. Then, balked by the staunch brick walls of the homes at the foot of the hill, the death-dealing mass swept back towards the water. Like eggshells, it crushed the buildings of the North End yard of the city's paving division. To the north, it swirled and wiped out practically all of Boston's only electric freight terminal. Big steel trolley freight cars were crushed as if eggshells, and there piled up cargo boxes and merchandise, minced like so much sandwich meat. Adding to this awful wreckage was the fact that the sailors who disgorged from a ship that was docked in the North End were slowed by the fact that they were now knee-deep in molasses, unable to rescue. 20 people died, 150 people were injured. No one's exactly sure what happened, but the theory is that it had been freezing in Boston's North End, 2 degrees on January 15th. Suddenly, though, the temperature climbed to 40 degrees. They then poured a whole new casing a whole new amount of new warm molasses, and basically this created gas, and this tank couldn't handle it. So there was a massive, massive class action suit. This was new. And the class action suit is itself part of what makes this story extraordinary. But the class action suit itself was a maddening behemoth of a thing. 119 claims. At the first meeting, there were 125 lawyers pressing their big boxy suits against each other in the courtroom. So they whittled it down to just 2 sets of lawyers and then the company. And the company that owned the tank said, well, this wasn't our fault. It was done by anarchists, this is not like January 6th and Antifa did it. This was real because the Boston area had experienced 40 explosive incidents the year leading up to the molasses flood. And the reason this molasses was all in this enormous tank is they were converting the molasses into alcohol for munitions to fight in World War I. And the reason anarchists were blowing things up is they were against the U.S. activities in Europe. But in the aftermath of this 5-year-long trial, they found that the man who had supervised the distillery tank's construction not only lacked technical training, but couldn't read blueprints. No legitimate engineers or architects had been commissioned to assess the structure. And because the structure was in an area where there were lots of immigrants and people who didn't, have much political power, there wasn't too much terrible concern about it. They also found at trial that the container leaked so much molasses that kids from the neighborhood would take pails and hold it under the barrels or this enormous 50-foot structure to capture the molasses that leaked. And instead of fixing it, the company just painted the thing brown so that you couldn't see the molasses. In the end, the United States Industrial Alcohol Company was compelled to pay $15 million in today's money, which isn't very much, but it set the precedent that you could be held liable, businesses could be held liable for culpable for unsafe structures. So right after that, Boston required that engineers sign off on any building and that an actual engineer put his or her signature to the construction of the thing so that you wouldn't have structures like this anymore. And that then swept the country, bringing accountability into construction into the American history.
Woo!
Woo!
Emily, what is your chatter?
Mine is so much more contemporary and earnest. Okay, so we have made it through the whole show without talking about Israel, Gaza, Palestine. But for people who are thinking about this, whether they like it or not, I have a few podcasts to recommend. The first is called Hesket Oslo, which just means Oslo podcast in Hebrew. It's by Arnon Degani, who is a scholar at Penn. It's currently in Hebrew, but it's coming out in English soon. And it's a long look back at Oslo, the peace negotiations of the 90s, what led up to them, what went wrong in them. I've read in English the scripts of the first 3 episodes, and I thought it was excellent. So keep an eye out for that. And then I've also been listening to a podcast called This is Palestine, put out by the Institute of Middle East Understanding, that's been pulling in voices from Gaza, and also has a look back at Oslo, because that's 30 years ago. And then my last one is Ezra Klein this week interviewed Peter Beinart and Spencer Ackerman, and I found it quite moving. So if you've missed that, check it out. Short.
So my chatter is it's very self-involved, which is that because I realized I was talking to someone at a cocktail party and what I actually talk about, and it's this. And I'm trying something which I've never done before, and I've been craving learning how to do it, which is I'm trying to learn how to sing.
That's so great.
Which is that
I love that you're doing this.
So you two in particular, over our time together, we've had some sing-alongs together, and you two are both musical. And I have this, I'm going to sound like an egomaniac here for a second. I have this really resonant, really nice speaking voice, and people always tell me that. It's true. I know it's true. But I have never really been able to sing, and I've been embarrassed by it and scared of it. And so I decided I really wanted to sing.
You're doing
and
this.
so I've been taking lessons, and it's so hard.
Wait, tell us what they're like. What is the nature of how does it go? What do you come in, and is it Mary Had a Little Lamb, or how's it go?
Well, I have this great teacher, Karen Harris, who's teaching me, and she has me learning how to blow through a straw, sort of blow notes through a straw, because that's supposed to help me do something, just trying to learn scales, doing breathing exercises.
The breathing exercises.
And one of the problems is I have no innate musicality and also no sense of rhythm. And those two things are both difficult. I can kind of stay on pitch. I actually can sort of sing.
You can hear that, so that's good.
Yeah, but I can't, I can't tell what notes are in relation to each other, and I don't understand the language of it. And so, I remember listening to you talk. I don't know what a key is. That doesn't mean anything to me. And I can't, no matter how much I pound it, I can't.
Did you take any music lessons when you were little?
Very little.
Okay.
Very little.
Well, you learn that
But
stuff.
I don't think you actually. I'm not sure I'm going to actually need to know that.
Yeah.
I think it's more just learning to use the voice to try to match the sound.
How do you find the breathing business?
It seems okay.
Because at various times in my career, since I picked print for a reason, I have had lessons about how to talk on television, which to me is I cannot think of anything more painful. And there's a lot of this breathing going on. If I had your voice, I could really make something of this thing.
You could. You'd have a career. You might have a career in TV.
And so, but having said that, the breathing, there is something to it. But do you?
I'm sure I'm definitely getting better. I can tell I'm getting better. I can tell the breathing is helping. I absolutely understand when I sing to myself. I know I sound better.
Are you a bass?
Weirdly, I like sometimes, but I'm not. I can't. I'm erratic. Sometimes I'm a bass, and sometimes I'm not a bass. And so.
Oh my God.
You did kind of set yourself up, but you could also postpone it. We could sing with you if you think something you know.
I kind of wondered if that was going to happen.
What? I mean, what do you mean you kind of wondered? This is all some bait exercise. And well done, everybody, for taking it.
Okay, all right. Okay. I'll sing. I don't think I've ever been as scared of anything as I am right at this moment.
Oh my God, this is so brave of you. I mean...
Okay. So there's a Tom Waits song, Jersey Girl, that Bruce Springsteen does this cover of a Tom Waits song, Jersey Girl, and that's the song I've been singing to myself. So I'm going to try it. Okay. Oh my God. Wow. Oh my God. I'm going to close my eyes too. I got no time for the corner boys out on the street making all that noise, or the girls down on the avenue, 'cause tonight I want to be with you. Tonight I want to take that ride, cross the river to the Jersey side, take you to the carnival, and go on all the rides. 'Cause down the shore everything's all right. You and your baby on a Saturday night. You know all my dreams come true when I'm walking down the street with you. Sing sha-la-la-la-la-la-la. 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 Sha-la-la-la-la. Thank you. Well, I'm taping it all too, so maybe it'll be a podcast one day. All right. Thank you. That was wow.
I just to get it back to me. On Instagram, I saw in an Irish pub. It was like 100 people smashed into this Irish pub singing a Mumford & Sons song, and I posted it on Instagram, and like 6 responses were, David Plotz would love this. It was massive group singing, which is the other thing you love.
I do love it. Okay. All right. So, all right. Thank you all. That was so nice of you. We have 2 special guest chatters. Our first guest chatter is a listener chatter. Listeners, you have emailed us chatters@gabfest@slate.com. Thank you. And we got one a few weeks ago from someone which was about Wisconsin. We thought, why don't we invite Jake Cinderbrand to come and chatter live and in person? So Jake, come on out.
Hello.
Thank you for coming.
I'm Jake. I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota, but a native Madisonian, and my chatter is about one of Madison's many gifts to the world, the Wisconsin idea, a progressive era philosophy that universities have a mission of conducting research for the public good, and the public has a duty to fund higher education. And over the years, the Wisconsin idea has led to funding higher education to countless scientific breakthroughs and many of the progressive reforms of the last century. And while you're in town, you can taste one of the sweetest legacies of the Wisconsin idea, Babcock. The world's greatest ice cream, available only in Madison, made by the UW's Food Sciences Department. While you're here, stop by the Union for a scoop. Every flavor is delightful, but try the orange custard chocolate chip.
Sweet.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
We have a second guest chatter, which is when we were coming to Madison, there was somebody here who we were so excited to hear about because he's a podcast hero. Mike Duncan is a historian. He's the author of 2 New York Times bestsellers, one about Rome, one about the Marquis de Lafayette. And he's the creator of 2 acclaimed podcasts, Revolutions, and then the podcast that probably all of you know, The History of Rome. When that meme went around a couple of weeks ago about how often is your husband, boyfriend, father thinking about Rome, the answer is, if you're Mike Duncan, all the time, apparently. But he is to blame for all of that Rome contemplation. So please join us in welcoming Mike Duncan for a chatter.
Hello. Do I have any people? Hi, my people. So should I talk?
Yeah.
What's your chatter?
I'm here to chatter. Okay, so the bare minimum is that I'm here to make sure that everybody thought about Roman history today, which you're doing right now because I'm talking to you about Roman history, and so you're all thinking about it in your heads. But mostly what I want to chatter about is something we were talking about before the show, which is that I have written a couple of books and I've done a couple of podcasts, and they have largely been about the collapse of civilizations and societies. And my first book was about the fall of the Roman Republic and how, problems 50 or 60 years before Caesar comes along is actually like some of the things that are eating out the foundations of the Republic and causes it to fall. I did a long podcast series where each season is about me describing a society that is starting out pretty healthy and is just in stages falling apart until it collapses into revolution, and I wouldn't be talking about it unless it did collapse into revolution. And so the last, say 5-8 years or so has been trying for all of us in terms of looking around and seeing, the signs of collapse. And Mike, do you see any, sort of revolutionary hints out there? Like, do you think that maybe we're in a bad moment here? And I'm like, of course we are. I see them everywhere. But where that can take us is to someplace which becomes a little bit nihilistic and maybe a little black-pilled, where we look at all of these problems and we start to think that maybe they're insurmountable. Maybe there's too much happening. Maybe there's actually nothing that we can do about any of this. And so I'm currently working on a book right now. I'm doing a book about the crisis of the 3rd century, which is a period in Roman history where we've left the high empire behind, and Rome was probably flourishing as the result of a climate system that had prevailed over the Mediterranean for like 400 years that started to shift in the late 2nd century and early 3rd century. There was a climate shift. This started making migratory patterns throughout Eurasia. It started kicking people into motion. Growing patterns and grazing patterns started to change. People weren't able to make a living anymore. There was a plague that comes through. The Cyprian plague comes through and starts eating up the underbelly. Yeah, did somebody just shout out the Cyprian plague? It was horrible, man. They think it was like Ebola. So the Romans really were facing something that very nearly collapsed their entire civilization. And I think that they were facing natural factors, human factors, economic factors that were beginning to take them down. And so why, though, do they not collapse and instead manage to pivot and turn it around and begin to put their civilization back together, which is something that happens? And so my point here is just that when we look to the past, we can often look to it and see warning signs. We can see how bad history can get. We can start to get worried about all of these things and think to ourselves, well, history is teaching us that basically everything is going to collapse and be bad. And I'm here to tell you that we can also look to history and find opportunities for hope. and to see that what happened was not some magical thing. It was groups of people getting together and doing things that needed to be done, that either in sort of one dramatic gesture or in long-term sort of piecing of things back together, that we can come through these things, and that humans actually do these things all the time. And history is full of generous people, and history is full of patient people, and history is full of joyful people, and history is not just full of all of these things that will have us go forth in our lives and feel that we're surrounded by doom and gloom. Who was the Matt Gaetz of Rome? Oh, some guy who got stabbed and later dumped in a sewer. That's about his level of, stature. So that was certainly longer than 1 minute, but I certainly wanted to leave everybody with there's hope. There's hope. And history teaches us that there is hope, and history teaches us that the only thing that we can count on is ourselves.
So I'm going to give you an extra 30 seconds. What's one or two things that were done in the 3rd century or 2nd century to help them recover? A specific thing.
Boy, let me tell you. There's actually one, because I was just working on this bit today, is there was depopulation that was happening inside the empire because of prolonged wars, because of the plagues, because of other conditions. And then there were these people who were pressing upon the borders of Rome along the Rhine River and along the Danube River because of this climate shift that was happening in the 2nd and 3rd century. And so they were like, we want to move into the empire. And the Romans were fighting them, and there were lots of wars along the borders. And then after like 30 or 40 years of this, with the borderlands completely depopulated and a population of people who still wanted to move there, the Emperor Probus starts on a systematic level saying, well, why don't you guys just come live in our empty lands and allow your people and your work and your labor to now not be something that we resist, but something that we invite in to this place, which I believe probably put the Romans on the road to at least 200 more years of sustained, hegemony over the Mediterranean world. Gee whiz, we're living in a country with a declining birth rate and an aging population, and boy, how are we ever going to pay for all of this stuff? And there's all these immigrants, so we can't let them in here. Kind of think maybe we can. And I kind of think that the Romans, of all people, are the ones who teach us this. And people want to hijack Roman history and be like, well, this is about a bunch of white guys who are going around as patriarchal and it's great. No, this is not what the Romans were. And if we can learn a lesson about maintaining a polyglot empire from the Romans, then we should learn that lesson.
Mike Duncan, thank you.
I'll get out of here.
That's our show for today. The Political Gabfest is produced by Shana Roth. Our researcher is Julie Hugan. Katie Rayford pulled all of this together for us here in Madison. Thank you to our hosts at the Majestic Theater and to all my colleagues at Cast Madison. Thank you to the wonderful sold-out crowd here at the Majestic. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Alicia Montgomery is VP of Audio for Slate. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Operations. Please email us your chatter at gabfest@slate.com. For Emily, Bazelon, and John Dickerson, I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week. Hello, Slate Plus. How are you? So our Slate Plus segment today is the Q&A. Some of you submitted questions, and we'll hit a few of them. Emily, take us away.
Bike, bus, car, or walk? Why? I really like how these are all one-syllable words in this question. I mean, bike, if at all possible. I've been skeptical of e-bikes because I just felt like it was an excuse to not move your arms and legs around. But what I understand and appreciate now about e-bikes is that they could take you into colder weather because you don't have to then get all sweaty, right? And then you could possibly be outside longer biking. But you're just skeptical of this whole
I'm just trying to
thing.
figure out why the e-bikes, you said move your arms and legs around.
Legs.
Where do the arms come in?
I guess you're right. Good point. Yeah, there isn't a whole lot of arm movement.
I'm just thinking you're a really enthusiastic bicyclist. I walk. because I can't bike because of my back. And
you've never really been a biker, though. I don't feel like your urban life.
Well, when I was oh my gosh, though, when I was a kid, when you're a bike as a kid, when you're a bike, I was such an enthusiast. I thought I was a bike for a while. When you're a kid, a bike is your first taste of freedom, and you can bike into town. You can go down just as fast. That's a little bit faster than you can tolerate on that hill, and those ramps. How many people had plywood that was available, and you learned about a fulcrum, right? Because you'd set up the jump, and then it would go donk, and then you'd go dink. And after about 112 tries, you finally figured that out. Oh, I loved bikes as a kid, but you're right. As an adult,
you like the pace of walking better.
Yeah, also walking is much more, I'm trying to be better at noticing things, and I feel like walking is more available to that.
I'm bike or walk, but they're all great. And you need them all. And people who pretend you don't need a car, you probably need a car.
David, if you were a genie and there was one thing you could change about government, what would it be?
About the U.S. government or about all governments?
I think do the U.S. government.
I think if you're a genie, you can choose.
I think I'd have a parliamentary system, I guess.
Wave a wand and make a parliamentary system.
I think so. But it would have to not be a gerrymandered. It'd have to be somehow
proportional representation.
Proportionally representative.
I was thinking about that.
What would you do, Emily?
Well, I want to do 3 things, not one. I mean, proportion. I might.
You get 3 wishes with genies. That is the tradition.
I'm trying to think if I would rank them. I might put proportional representation at the top, but changing the composition of the Senate. Oh man, I mean, so that we're not having such huge population disparities. I mean, which actually is another form of non-proportional representation. And then no life tenure for judges anymore.
I think we should make them vote. Like they don't
mandatory voting or
no, not to elect people, but make the lawmakers vote. They don't vote on. I mean, this is one of the things that the new speaker says he's going to try and make them do. We'll see if how successful he is. But you have to vote on stuff, like all kinds of stuff. You have to go on the record, vote for things, and take a stand.
That was just a snippet from our Slate Plus conversation. If you want to hear the whole conversation, go to slate.com/Gabfest Plus to become a member today. Hey, Gabfest listeners, I have a special message for those of you in Canada. It's about a show that I think you should listen to, Canadaland. Every week, Canadaland's journalists bring you news and conversations that honestly can be hard to find these days. With rigorous reporting and thoughtful analysis, their episodes can bring you into the most important conversations from across the country. From a radical form of reconciliation emerging in Saskatchewan to in-depth debates around gun rights and the rise of fascism, Canadaland stories will surprise you and make you think. Try Canadaland today to find out why Canadian news doesn't have to sound like Canadian news. Search Canadaland in your podcast app.
Maybe you've heard that there's a civil war coming.
Tyrants disarm the people they intend to oppress.
That with more than 100 gun deaths a day in America, the powers that be are going to have to do something.
They don't like the Second Amendment. They want to get rid of the Second Amendment.
You've heard that the government has always hated an armed populace.
All they want to do is take guns away from law-abiding citizens.
But in my 8 years of gun reporting, the game is rigged. My name is Alon Stevens, and I'm an investigative reporter. What if I told you that when it comes to the U.S. government, we're the biggest gun dealers on the block? That the halls of American power know exactly what I know. That guns aren't just who we are. They're what we do best.
Guns are flying off the shelves. Ghost gun mill in Dorchester.
Drop the gun! Drop the gun!
This is The Gun Machine, how America is forged by the gun industry. A new podcast from WBUR and The Trace. Search and follow The Gun Machine in your podcast app.